Hello, BookTube. Recently, Sean the Book Maniac over on his channel did an original tag, the Alphabet Soup tag, which I hope he continues. He has a lot of more letters in the alphabet to go through. But his first tag was A is for author, in which there were a whole bunch of letter-oriented book tags, and you got extra credit if your author or book answers featured prominently the letter A. And I did the tag, and I had great fun doing it. And after I was done with it, it occurred to me that I had a lot more to say on the subject, so I'm doing an addendum to the A is for author tag. I don't know that tags on BookTube come with addendums, but they do now. Mine anyway. You all expect tedium from me anyway. And I might do this for all of them, but I want to do a Penguin Classic addendum to A is for author. If that isn't too wonky for you. I want to give you 6 book suggestions, strong book suggestions, that also have the letter A, where the author's name starts with A, as sort of an adjunct to my A is for alphabet, my A is for author tag. The first one I want to start off with here is no stranger to this channel. He's a stranger to the rest of BookTube. He's a stranger to most of the rest of the bookish community, unfortunately. He's great, though. This is Ludovico Ariosto. This is his book, Orlando Furioso. This is book 1. Oh God, we have some sort of glare going on. There we go. Oh, I don't know if that's any better, but he wrote this. Penguin broke it up into 2 books and translated it by Barbara Reynolds. The Barbara Reynolds translation is amazing, and it's a long and complicated story that is meant to be a historical epic about the ancestors of the noble house of Este in Ferrara, where Ariosto worked. They were his patrons. He had a fascinating life on his own. I'm waiting for a great big 800-page biography of him that takes into account every line of his poetry and also every bit of historical records, many of which have not been translated out of Italian. There was a biography of him years ago that was... when I finished it, I thought, okay, this might make a passable introduction to the biography that I'm thinking of, but it isn't anywhere near a start on the subject. But equally fascinating was his book. Orlando Furioso is the main motor of the plot is Roland, the song of Roland. Roland, that's Orlando, and he's Superman. He's a super being. He's one of many. There are many super beings throughout here. This is the closest that Renaissance literature ever came to giving us a comic book in verse form. And Orlando at one point loses his wits. He goes insane for love. And when Ariosto writes that, he means it literally. Not only does Orlando go insane, but he actually does lose his wits. They go to the moon. The moon turns out to be where all lost things go. And he becomes a rampaging monster. And he is invulnerable and super strong. So him being a rampaging monster is a big deal. But in addition to that, there are also tons of complicated ongoing plot lines about a gigantic cast of characters, some of whom are pagan and some of whom are Christian, and many of whom also have superpowers of one kind or another. And one of the refreshing things about Ariosto, not to pander here, but he started it, not me, is that quite a few of these superpowered beings who are so formidable and so complex and so interesting are women. And I don't know how to describe the reading experience, but I so strongly recommend it to give it a try. I'm assuming that you would be reading it in English, and there's one other, the recent and fairly high-profile translation of Orlando Furioso, but it was heavily abridged, and it's nowhere near as good. Barbara Reynolds did a great job on her translation. It really deserves to be in print in a huge volume with really thin onion skin papers from Penguin, but no, no. But each of the volumes is huge, and I really, really recommend it. Ariosto was a hack. He was not a self-conscious, artsy-fartsy, epic poet like you would get in like, for instance, Philip Sidney or Edmund Spenser. Often left the big folio manuscript of his poem open, so that passing people in the lobby could add verses of their own, and sometimes he would keep them. So it's a rollicking good time of an adventure story. And when you see something like this and you don't know anything about Ariosto, if you were to see two 500-page volume Penguin classics with old tapestry paintings on the cover, you might not think that. It might be the last thing you think, that this is a rollicking good adventure story, but that's exactly what it is. So that's had to be my first recommendation. Then the next one will go from the ridiculous to the sublime. We'll stick with the letter A. This is Hannah Arendt, and this is Eichmann in Jerusalem. She went to Eichmann's trial and reported on it, and it's the book and the sentiments behind it are too often boiled down to the phrase "the banality of evil," because Eichmann sat there with his, his goggle-thick glasses and his hunched posture and his office clerk air, and it wasn't at all. It struck Hannah Arendt and a whole bunch of other observers that it isn't at all what you were expecting. If you're talking about a towering, monstrous, once-in-a-lifetime evil, it should surely look and act different from this. I've always thought that concept and that observation was in itself a little banal. There were big, flashy, romantic figures of evil at Nuremberg, and they weren't any more satisfying. There's nothing satisfying about this. The whole point is to get the trial over with and hang the person. But apart from that sentiment that this book is often boiled down to, this is brilliant. Everything Hannah Arendt wrote was brilliant, but this is a brilliant, brilliant work. An amazing thing to think of the conjunction that not only did the victors in this trial, in this contest, this war, put the losers on trial instead of just killing them out of hand. I mean, the victors knew already what monsters these people were. They are not rehabilitatable. They are not inside the bounds of the rule of law, nor do they care to be. So they should have been exterminated out of hand as they were captured. Instead, the victors decided to have trials. And the trials had actual outcomes at stake. These weren't kangaroo trials. You could walk, you could get a few years, you could get life, you could get death. That was remarkable. And the other remarkable bit of timing is that people like Hannah Arendt were alive and able to go, observe it all, and write what I consider to be, I was very happy when Penguin came out with this. I considered it to be a classic. Now this next one, of course, will be known to all of you, but I couldn't let the letter A go by without it. This is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. We saw this recently with her, a book about her and about this book that just recently came out in paperback, or will maybe on Tuesday. Oh wait, this is Tuesday. All right, today then. And this is the Penguin classic of the book, her classic, beloved proto-YA book that I liked. I have always liked Little Women. There's nothing about it not to like. But I didn't love it until after I read that appreciation and went back to it. And I am still looking around for one of the only books that I currently want. There was a big annotated Little Women, I think by Norton, a big white thing that I got to look at. I've dipped into it in bookstores, but for some reason, it might have been Norton, it might not have been, it might have been Harvard. They do dueling annotated versions. One of them was much better than the other. I think it was one of them had a white dust jacket and was much bigger. It was like a huge book. I think it was Norton, and I remember just waiting for Norton to send it to me, and they never did. And so I never got around to getting it. And now I think it might be going out of print. But that's the version of Little Women that I want on my shelf, in addition to the Penguin Classic. But I couldn't help but recommend it if you haven't read it. It is a weird kind of American classic. And our next book is also a weird kind of American classic. American would have struck its author as jingoistic, and weird might be understating things. This is The Education of Henry Adams by Henry Adams. And I do not know how to classify this book. I don't know how to quantify it at all. If you call it an autobiography, then you have to call all normal autobiographies something else. I don't know what this is. It's an autobiographical meditation on the nature of America, on the nature of progress, on the nature of human nature. And it's brilliant. It is often, when libraries or publishers or critics rank the great works of nonfiction of the 20th century, this is often put at number one, and deservedly so. It has all the Adams brilliance, all the Adams indeterminacy. There aren't any real easy answers here, but there are whole passages that you will underline and memorize. Some of them will come to your mind even without trying to memorize them. It's a weird hypnotic book of a type that, again, like with Ariosto, if you were to see it just like this, a black and white Penguin classic, or a classic of some big hardcover of some other kind, The Education of Henry Adams, that's the title, you wouldn't have any concept of what was inside. You really wouldn't. Any concept of what was inside or what the reading experience was like. And you owe it to yourself. If you're interested in 20th century America, and especially the death of 19th century America, and also if you're interested in the Addams family, this is people say that the familiar refrain is that the Addams family has been in decline, that the whole time that we've seen it in the spotlight of American history, it has been in decline. I don't know about that. I've always contested that. There's another book coming out along those lines just in a few months. And I've always wondered, what does that mean? What do you mean by decline? Okay? You have John Adams, who helped to birth the country. You have John Quincy Adams, who was president of the United States. Then you have John Quincy makes an appearance in this book, and you have a couple of Adamses in after that were great diplomats. America owes them a lot. And then you have The Education of Henry Adams, which is an immortal work of great literature. One of the great sui generis works of nonfiction, right alongside Room of One's Own or Seven Pillars of Wisdom. This is one of those books, largely uncategorizable and largely brilliant. So I don't call that a decline. But anyway, that's another A. Then for our next A, we're going to go across the pond, and again we're going to shift into lighter fare. This is Lucky Jim by Kingsley Amis. This is a quintessential dissolute academic campus novel. So if those things grate on you, if you don't have any patience for that, then you're going to hate this book. but there are some. This is widely regarded as a minor comic masterpiece, and I tend to agree with that. In fact, the more I read it, the more my estimation goes up. I know a lot about Kingsley Amis. I know the conditions under which this book was written. I know how much better it could have been, as condescending as that sounds. But I still think that there are large stretches of pure comic magic in this book, so I had to include it. And then the last one here is a whopper. It's a chunker in the booktube style, but it is an amazing work that doesn't get enough attention. My namesake on booktube, Steve Reads Books, used to love this book, but he's gone. He's long gone, and I don't know that I've seen anyone else on booktube mention it. It's La Regenta by Leopoldo Alas, and it's a great, big, huge thing. Penguin might still put this out, maybe with a different cover. This one totes that it's the first translation into English. And this is it's a gigantic novel. It took its author years and years to do. He died very young. He died when he was barely, I think, 50. And didn't have a whole lot. He was a fairly typical scratching man of letters. Was an esteemed literary critic, and I have read some of his literary criticism of what I wouldn't give. Oh, I say this all the time on this channel. It's a familiar refrain, but nevertheless, what I wouldn't give to have a book this big in English of his book reviews. Because he was one of those literary men that never stopped writing book reviews, even when he was doing other things, even when he was generating a great big thing like this. And this is an amazing work, really a true epic of Spanish literature, about a woman who is unsatisfied. She wants to. I mean, there's a whole bunch more going on here, and the portrait of town life is wonderful, just wonderful. But at the heart, it's the story of a woman who is. She wants more. She knows she wants more, and she can't quite put her finger on how to describe. It's almost like she lacks the vocabulary to describe what it is that she wants out of her own life. And eventually, she seeks for that something in infidelity. And that led a lot of critics at the time. Alice received a lot of criticism for this book. In fact, if he could look back, if he could come back and see that this is regarded as his masterpiece, that it's regarded as a masterpiece, that at least some people have read it. I don't think it's nearly as well known as it should be. I think he would be wryly pleased. But critics said, compared it to Madame Bovary and said that it was amoral, that it was derivative. It's not any of those things. It's just amazing. I reread it about 4 years ago, and I need to read it again, but I'm not sure that this Penguin will hold up, even if I reinforce it. This one has seen better days. As I have read this whole thing and chunks of it several times. So maybe I either need to get a new Penguin Classic, if they make one, or just find a really pretty Spanish edition. I'm sure there's a really pretty Spanish edition. But anyway, there you go. That is sort of an author annex to A is for author. I wanted to go through some penguins that have A is for author and talk a little about them. Just a few more books to torture your TBR. But I will wrap this up for now. But I'll be back. Thank you, Book 2.